Hey folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. Tonight I want to do something I don't usually do. I'm going to talk a little bit about something I saw on Twitter. Now, I'm not going to show you this tweet. I highly doubt my channel is going to lead to anyone getting dogpiled, but it's who said it isn't really important. It's a sentiment that's echoed a lot, and I'm going to just read the tweet for you real quick. It says, "Good morning. The term plot hole implies that stories have to explain themselves to you. They don't." I see this attitude a lot, especially among modern creative minds, and it is complete and utter hogwash. Listen, I told a story last night. It was a great story. You probably don't care about that, though, because you didn't hear it. The story had no audience. There was no one here to hear it. It just happened in my own head. And you know what? That's fine. That's how a lot of stories that we all know and love get their start. It's something that someone told to themselves in their head while they were waiting in line, or feeling lonely at the back of the classroom one day, or, you know, trying to entertain their kids. There are lots and lots of origins for stories. And you know, they are probably not very good on that first draft, but that's fine. All stories start somewhere. But the point is that all those stories need to have an audience if they're going to be something that are shared and talked about. And of course, when you start talking about plot holes, it's almost always in the context of discussing a third-party story between yourself and someone else. And when you talk about plot holes, you're not nitpicking, you're not insulting, you're talking about how the story that was told to an audience, namely you, didn't get the point of the story across. People talk about plot holes because they don't know what happened, and they really want to know what happened. There are usually plot holes in most stories that you can find if you go over them with a really fine-tooth comb. Because no storyteller is perfect, and that's fine. But striving for excellence in storytelling is a good and admirable thing, and looking at plot holes helps you do that. And a plot hole, when something happens in a story that is not explained by the story, when someone finds a plot hole, what they're telling you is not, you suck as a storyteller. It's not, your story is terrible. They're saying, I can't understand what happened in your story at this point. I don't understand why this happened, or this seems to conflict with something else in the story that happened. Can you explain why this conflict took place? Your duty, your obligation as a storyteller is to make the audience understand your story. That is your role, okay? When somebody says, well, there was a plot hole, they are saying, the story you told did not make sense to me, your audience. Now, it's true. It is true that there are going to be assholes who will just dig through your story and bring up every plot hole they possibly can. And they're going to do it to try and make you look stupid. And you know what? Those people are your best friends, because they will find every single boneheaded thing you did in your story and they'll bring it to your attention. And then you'll think, oh man, maybe that I didn't think about that at all. And maybe I need to fix that the next time I tell this kind of story. Or maybe I can create a justification to put in my next draft of the story. And sometimes you're going to have thought about, you know, whatever plot hole they're bringing up, but you forgot to put the explanation in the final draft. I have done this, I don't know how many times, as I rewrite and edit stories I'm working on. I will actually eliminate important pieces of exposition or important setups that make the story make sense. And then when they're, when you do that by accident, you leave a plot hole. And it's important that you get all that in there so your audience follows what's going on. And when people point that kind of stuff out to you, it means, maybe you need to find that hole in your process. Maybe you need to work on the way you revise things and change that up some. Maybe, just maybe, they've thought of something that has an explanation that you're not ready to share with the audience yet. And that means maybe you needed to obscure those facts a bit more, make it a bit more mysterious, because you're trying to build suspense. Suspense increases investment in your story. It makes your audience want to know what's going to happen even more. Whereas finding a plot hole, finding an incongruity, finding something in the story that doesn't make sense decreases your audience investment in your story. They get so confused they don't naturally track with the development of your characters or the events of your plot, and they get so hung up on this one little thing. That means you probably need to go back and look at how you handle suspense and make it more clear the parts your audience should be focusing on. Information is kept hidden for a reason. Sometimes you just need to obscure things more. And sometimes it means, the part of the story where your plot hole is at, it may just need to be cut. If you're working on something and you can't make it make sense to a reader, you know what? Ask yourself, is it important? Do you really need to sort all of this stuff out to make your story work? Or do you just need to give it the axe and come back to it in another story where you have the time to properly develop it? Now, all of this comes with a couple of caveats. The people who tend to find the most in the way of plot holes are critics or just, members of the fandom, people with internet autism, people who are analyzing your story to a degree which you will probably never be able to do, even with all the editors you seek out and all the time you invest in it. The crowd has more capacity for information gathering and analysis than you will ever have. That's just all there is to it. And you can gather the lessons from that and you can benefit from them, but you're probably not going to be in a position to correct many of the mistakes that they point out. And that is unfortunate. It would be nice if there was a way you could get an early access crowd of a couple of thousand people in to look at your story and still be able to go through an editing process and then pitch that story to the wider public, and keep some mystery, keep some suspense. It would be nice, but that's not the way publishing works, unfortunately. So what do you do when critics start pointing out all the plot holes? Well, the first thing you do is you grow a skin. Yes, it sucks to be told that you're dumb. And yes, it sucks to have your mistakes paraded out there for all the world to see. But if your story was really good, if you have real confidence in your story, have confidence that the good parts of your story will outshine the plot holes. When people bring up plot holes to you, acknowledge them. Don't try and pussyfoot around the subject. Don't try and pretend you're some kind of writing god who never leaves plot holes. Just accept that they're there. Acknowledge them. Say, yeah, I screwed that up. And move on. Move on quickly. Don't dwell on it. Don't let it bother you. Just move on to the good parts of the story, because that's what really matters. If your story is good, you will have such a good command of its high points. You will love it so much that you will be able to immediately move on to the things about that story that are great. You will immediately be able to engage your audience about what is good about the story. And that is what your audience is going to respond to most strongly anyways. Yes, there are people who are just too anal retentive, too autistic, too focused on the minutia or the ins and outs of storytelling to be able to enjoy your story in spite of its plot holes. And that's too bad. They must have a really hard time with media. But the vast majority of people, they will look past your plot holes and they will say, okay, yeah, I mean, you made this mistake, but I still like the story you're telling. And those are the people you want to engage with the most anyways. They are the people who will be your diehard fans and follow your story wherever it goes. So, yeah, just don't let it get to you. Many of the people who point out plot holes will be doing it because they love your story, and that's a good thing too. But your story is not a thing that's entitled to exist without an audience. That's not a story. That's the intellectual equivalent of masturbation. And you really should just keep that kind of thing private. Don't share it with an audience. That's gross. And if your attitude is, I should be able to do this in public, well, then you're gross too. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. When you are a storyteller, you are trying to engage an audience. And when your story has a plot hole, that means you have failed in that endeavor. And that means you need to get good, scrub. That's not a fun thing to think about. I get it. I had one of the toughest writing professors in the country. But it is something you need to hear. Don't let it discourage you. Be encouraged by knowing that people are taking the time to care this much about your writing. And whatever you do, don't knock your audience. Audiences are so hard to get. They are so important to creatives and storytellers. They can't control you. They can't drive you, but they have to be respected for what they are. Anyways, that's really all I wanted to say. One other thing. Not everything people call a plot hole is actually a plot hole. So yeah, do ask people who say, your work has plot holes to explain what they are, so that you can actually try and overcome them. And be aware that some things like odd character motivations or things like that, those are not technically plot holes, but they're still probably a thing. If you're losing your audience over it, they're a thing you need to think about. So yeah, this could really apply to all kinds of audience feedback. It's just, audience feedback is super valuable. Don't diss it. Rather embrace it, and you will become a better storyteller. Anyways, that's all I got for tonight, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. There's a like and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.